chatting to Nick, who's the director of THDP, which it stands for. Nick, tell us, what does THDP stand for? DP stand for?
So the Hickson Design Partnership is a company which my wife and I founded in 2005, and it's my surname, much to my wife's chagrin, I have to say, because her name is Manino and she's Italian. And I don't know if you know, but the Italian women keep their maiden name. So she's known as Manuela Manino, and I'm Nicholas Hickson. So we decided a couple of years ago to just go by THDP, so that there was a little less confusion as such. So that's where it comes from.
I like that, because it sort of means, it was a bit like, when I was much younger, I used to be a little bit offended when people would say Miss or Mrs. And, it defines your marital status, but men don't have that. They're just, no one ever says Mr. or Master. So I understand that the Italian, very much in Europe, that women keep unique or their own family name, which is nice for the families that only have daughters.
I mean, it obviously throws up confusion sometimes because, as we're now growing the company, we're now based in Deptford in London, and we have been here since 2013. The company was, as I said, founded in Italy in 2005, and we were lucky enough to start working there on a hotel project, which was our first project, with a massively vertical learning curve.
When did you start? How old are you?
So Manuela and I met in 2001, and I was an interior designer working more in a sales position, and Manuela is an Italian architect, again working kind of in a sales environment for CP Hart. And then we were offered a project where they were looking for a project manager who was Italian English speaking, and Manuela was approached for that by a friend of hers. And that developed into, can you do the interior design for the project? But you only have a year, and it's for the Winter Olympics, and it's a resort. It's a huge project. And I guess in our naivety, which is a wonderful thing sometimes, we kind of said, okay, let's do it. Let's go for it. It's a change of lifestyle. We left London, drove over to Italy, set up camp in the middle of the Italian Alps, and off we went doing this amazing project. I didn't really speak much Italian. I'd never used AutoCAD. I'd never designed a hotel, although I designed lots of interiors for residential clients. And off we went, and it was an amazing, fantastic adventure. And certainly at the age we were just, I think, in our late 30s, early 40s, it's an amazing opportunity to kind of restart and re-kick your life. And I recommend it to anyone really to just step sideways, and look at the career that you have, and it's very easy to move forward and do something different. And it's invigorating and exciting and amazing at the same time.
Oh, fantastic. And what's interesting in your Thelma and Louise moment is that...
We didn't quite drive off the cliff, but...
No,
literally, we were literally driving through the mountains to set up camp, and we were there for 18 months. And it was just the most amazing experience. And what I learned, even before lean design became a kind of a watchword in design, is how to actually manage information, how to communicate with contractors and suppliers and fit out companies, which in Italy, there are just amazing companies there to work with, very open. You can send them a sketch and they just know what to do. The tilers are fantastic at doing their job. Case goods companies are amazing. And we were just surrounded by an amazing set of companies, which I guess held our hand through the experience. Rather than doing a kind of MEP drawing or a reflective seating plan, we would literally go on site and mark on the walls all the lights with a spray can. And that teaches you something about how to communicate with others. And it doesn't have to be the way that you think sometimes. As long as you're clear, concise, and prepared to put the time in, you don't have to sit there doing AutoCAD drawings. That's not to say that AutoCAD drawings and doing things professionally is not the best practice, but there are always other ways.
Yeah, but as you say, AutoCAD is fine for the professional designer in terms of interaction with other sat around the table, but when you go to site, it's a completely different ball game, because you're working with tradesmen and fit out experts that have a different set of rules and regulations. So I understand that, and the fact that you had that great background and experience working with CP Hart, who are also SBID
Yeah.
members, and they are fantastic. I would say distributors, aren't they? For people that
Yes,
don't know.
yeah. I mean, they're kind of
Or-
editors, so they take Italian or German products and put the whole collection together, which is what I guess the UK companies are best at, really,
yes,
in putting
assembly.
things together, assembling and actually designing and that. But I think what you were saying about the site and learning how to operate on site is a really extremely important
Yeah.
part of the design process, because very few people are born thinking in 3 dimensions or think visually. And when you're going on site, you suddenly look up and you realize what you've forgotten. Oh yeah, we have to look at the ceiling. We have to look at this element, and that I think you begin to understand that visual language of thinking in the round. It's something which, again, when you're trying to communicate in AutoCAD, is very difficult to express, which is of course
Yeah.
why people go into CGIs and renderings, which
Yes.
are extremely expensive and laborious to create. So that essence of thinking 3-dimensionally and maybe learning how to sketch or draw, which again, I mean, I come from that analog time in the 70s and 80s where, you know, we learned how to draw things by hand. And again,
Yes.
you know, I don't want to go on about that because I think the younger listeners, you know, have been born with a phone in their hand or an iPad in their hands, which are extremely useful tools. But more
But you do.
important, to be able to sketch or think visually, I think, is a very, very important lesson. And how to break that down and uncomplicate it and think of design as a very simple exercise in thinking about the 3D space as a whole, as a kind of holistic space, really.
Yes, I agree. I think that when you sketch, you and prepare things on site, you tend to understand why something doesn't work. Whereas with a software program, it will just say, you know, you can't, this can't happen, but it doesn't always tell you, or it doesn't tell you at all why it doesn't work. So you don't have to visualize the problems that the computer has barred you from, and that's what I think is the barrier for designers, because you stop there. Whereas when you're on site, so tell me, before I ramble, tell me about your contractors, because I absolutely agree with you that a good designers in procuring their design need to have a great relationship with the contractors, and that might be the main contractor, but also on site there will be the other subcontractors, and their understanding and procurement of your vision is really important, that you have that conversation between you, and it's not always as common as we think it should be.
Well, I think again, it depends on the level where you sit. I mean, we are fortunate that we work on quite large hospitality projects, and therefore the kind of consultant team is being established for, you know, perhaps by the operators, so that Hilton, Marriott, Intercontinental would ask the owners or the people who own the project to actually put in a certain team. And in terms of procurement, that again, there is a kind of managed system for that, where as a designer you sit, you know, perhaps in a review position or a kind of in looking at the offers and doing, you know, effectively due diligence with the owner, or with the operator. I mean, I'm fortunate in a way because I you know, I studied furniture design. That when I go into a manufacturing, when I go into a contractor's manufacturing plant or factory, that I'm fairly familiar with what they are doing or how they're producing things. So in terms of the kind of that manufacturing element, you begin to kind of weigh things up against one another. But very often we are requested by the owners to go and visit companies to assess what they do. And that's an extremely important part of our work, because there's really nothing worse than working with a contractor that really is not so well developed that they don't understand exactly what is required at the level that we can really work at, where, you know, the expectation is that the manufacturer is producing executive or case goods drawings or shop drawings, and our work is simply to review those drawings based upon our design intent drawings, but then monitoring them on site and seeing how they work. Again, that's, I guess, like every single project we've worked on has been a different experience, and there are some bad experiences and there's some fantastic experiences. Most of them, I have to say, are amazing. And I'm always amazed when you've done a sketch of something or you've done a drawing of a reception desk, and you think, oh, is that going to work? And then very often you're actually surprised and gratified really that it's come out as well as you hoped it might. And I can give multiple examples of that where we've kind of visualized something, and you're stepping beyond yourself sometimes. Is this going to fit with that? Is that detail going to work with the other? And making sure they all kind of blend together. And when you're working with a great contractor, they know exactly how to handle those things very often. And if they don't, they'll find out, and they'll hold your hand through that and nearly always deliver something which is exceptional.
Yeah. Actually, that's really interesting because your vision means that, and scale, and with your background for furniture design means that if you can't find something off the shelf, you just sit and sketch it and work with companies, products and materials to create something very unique for the space, to scale as well. So it's probably one of the reasons why you've been so successful, that you can create an entire package that is unique to your client.
Yeah, and very often that might just simply be the millwork that you're doing, particular shelving or reception unit or something to fit a particular space there, that you'd have to do something custom. But very often, even in it's a combination of finding projects which fit that visual language which you've identified with the client from the get-go in terms of that kind of design narrative. So finding out elements or pieces which which fit that narrative, and that's becoming in some ways even more complicated because there is so much choice. I mean, when I started in design, I could name probably 50, 60 companies that produce amazing furnishings and lightings, and now it's endless. I mean, the choice is really quite bewildering, and I'm surprised sometimes that as an FF&E specifier, that it's so easy to get so visually lost, and to make a single choice from a multiple of choices, and that's the hardest thing. I guess 20 years ago there wasn't much choice, and it became that much easier to make one. So I can understand completely where people get kind of lost in design, because you can go rather down a rabbit hole really in just trying to choose a particular light fitting. But on top of that, when we design, it's a real pleasure for us to when we have the opportunity to design something unique for a project, that you kind of come up with an idea or visual element, and that gets realized. And then that's completely satisfying to me, because it's something that I wanted to do when I was 13. And I was asked by my career master, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a furniture designer. And I do that every day now. I mean, really every day, sitting there designing a desk for a reception or a layout for a spa or whatever it may be. It's something which I thoroughly enjoy.
That's lovely. You just touched on there about narratives for the design, but how do you build a narrative around a brand? You also mentioned various different hotel brands. So how do you build that narrative to meet those different requirements for the guest or the consumer for each of those separate brands? Are you given a brief, or do you define that and present that to your client?
I guess, I mean, obviously we're lucky enough to work with 3 or 4 of the major brands, Intercontinental and Hilton, Marriott, to name a few. But obviously within those larger brands sits their own hotel collection. So for example, I think, and it's almost difficult to keep count, but Intercontinental probably has 20 or 22 different brands within their collection. And obviously we don't design across all of that range. We tend to sit somewhere kind of upper middle in terms of the kind of quality 5-star or quality business hotel. But even within those collections, you'd have DoubleTree by Hilton or Hilton by Hilton. You now have Velcro, for example, by Intercontinental, and the Marriott, etc. So that there's each hotel has a particular, as it were, look and feel. I think generally what we find is that although some hotels would look, some collections would look more boutique than others, and others would tend to kind of want to keep a more business styled interior. Generally, they're all looking for what I would say is a similar element, a kind of sense of upscale residential, something very familiar, something very welcoming. They all sit within that pattern in a way. No one wants to go and sit in a rather boring empty space anymore. The lobbies and the meeting areas have become far more engaging and are spaces which the hotels really want to work for them, to actually give them the return of investment. So they are thoroughly, people aggregate there and meet there and sit in the lobby rather than just walk through it, check in and go up to their room. Lobbies have become, something completely different now.
They're not seen to be as an imposing. It used to be, that long walk from the main entrance door to the desk on a shiny marble floor, which was set to, intended to create the imposing brand, but that's all gone. That space is now work and, as you say, return on investment for
that sits completely against almost. I mean, there are still many hotels like that, because obviously when you imagine the cost of refurbishing a complete hotel, we're in the millions. So you're given a huge responsibility of 5 or 10 million euro to refurbish a hotel, and often more for a larger property. But creating that visual narrative from the kind of the guest arrival right through the lobby, and engaging with them and introducing them to kind of an F&B offering very, very, very early on, or into a casual meeting area, I think is what almost all brands are looking for, to kind of reinvigorate those public areas, which, as you say, for so many years were bland, bank-like, and try to kind of impress, and in a way that's less important. What they want now is something which shares a visual language of the culture around it. So if you're designing a property in Milan or in Florence, and I mention Italian companies because, again, we are kind of half Italian as a company, then it's so important to recognize the location and to reinforce that immediately upon the guest arrival, and to offer a hotel which is absolutely authentic to its location, to its culture, to its people.
Yes, but I noticed, on your website, THDPdesign.com, your hotels are all over Europe, and I laughed because I looked and I thought, wow, you're in Puglia and Rome and Milan and all over, and then Cardiff.
Well, the funny thing is, I mean, being based in London, we don't do enough work in the UK. I mean, I think the UK is a very particular space, and obviously there are many design companies here. I guess one of the reasons that we're very successful in Italy, and this is a kind of oddity in a way, that there are many Italian architects and brilliant architects, but and there are obviously and there are amazing and many different hotels. I mean, Italy is an absolute destination for travelers. I mean, it has so much historical content and culture and food. The sea offers so many opportunities for guests to take something from those areas, that it's full of hotels. Many of the hotels, though, are private, and maybe small, and again, obviously they're now. Go on.
What does that mean, private? Do you mean as in franchises?
No, they're privately owned, so they might be owned by a family. And that's true of this manufacturers too. B&B Italia or Casina, and Polyform for many years. Polyform, I still think, is family owned. I know Casina and B&B and Poltrona Frowns, many of these manufacturers have now grouped together and have now been bought out. But for so many years, one of the real points about Italian manufacturing is it was privately owned, which is why it had that real sense of taste, touch. When you have an individual who's sitting on top of a company like Prada or Gucci, defining its look and style, which again, maybe has changed over the recent years as these things have been bought out. That's what's defined it, and I think that's what's so striking about Italian companies, that they have for so many years had that individual touch. So many hotels are privately owned, but they're now part of a global environment, of global booking systems, where they're finding it ever more difficult to compete. Because obviously they rely on the British or the American markets or the international markets for their bookings. That if they're not on a kind of international booking system like Hilton or Marriott or IHG, they find it very difficult to engage with their guests. So they're gradually thinking, well, maybe we should rebrand or relook at what we offer, and step into a kind of international booking system, which is why many are becoming DoubleTree or whatever it may be, whatever brand to kind of fit into that booking system.
That's really interesting, because I was going to ask you, what's driving the growth of hotel brands? Is it the brand itself, or is it the consumer or the guest? Because guests seem to be much more demanding in everything. They always want to be now involved in the experience of everything they do. And I think that people now travel because travel is much cheaper, and they travel much more for pleasure than much more frequently per year than they ever did previously, because they can. And so do you think that the hotels have adapted to those demands fast enough, or do you think that the hotels are driving the appetite for the consumer to travel?
Well, I think ultimately it's probably guest driven. I mean, so it's market driven in a way, and that guests are becoming so much more sophisticated. And as you say, as the more they travel, and then the more they're looking for a particular experience. And I think certainly younger travelers in particular are just not satisfied with staying in a very, obviously they're traveling to a city that they don't know, Prague or Rome or Milan, as we've just mentioned, looking for a kind of very authentic experience, and therefore they're not satisfied with just staying in a bland, nondescript hotel. So I guess that's in a way the driver for the hotels, that if you imagine some of the brands which at the lower end of the market, they still want to have an identity which has something of the location. So even when we're designing some of the newer brands that are coming out, which in terms of the owners stepping into those brands and being scared off by the cost of converting into that brand and refurbishing it in a different style, many of the newer brands coming on the market are much more open to kind of what they would accept in terms of their brand requirements. And obviously, the sleeping experience is still important. So there may be a new mattress in the room, but again, you're left as a designer with more of an open palette and an ability to express something of the locality. And that's extremely important, that the guests arrive and feel that sense of location within the hotel itself, because what the hotels want is the kind of 360 experience for the guests. They don't want the guests to arrive, check into the room and go out for the day, go to a restaurant somewhere else, and they only rely on the room rate. They want guests to come back, to go down into the lobby, to meet others. People traveling, generally in groups now. They meet up. They can meet through social media, for example. So and even as business travelers, people are not just wanting to have a kind of a meeting experience in a separate meeting room. They may want it in a lobby space or an informal setting, or even if they're meeting within a meeting room, they break out somewhere else and then use other public areas to kind of aggregate their meetings. But I think the driver in all of that is really the sense of that the hotels are looking for that sense of authenticity, not just in the styling or the colors or the feel or the interior architecture, but right through the F&B offering or the drinks, the food has to have that sense of location. Years ago, I guess many hotels would quite happily put, a Chinese themed restaurant in a hotel in the middle of Florence, for example. But that just doesn't happen anymore. People want to arrive there and know that they're tasting the local food, and that the food is not just Italian, but also individually from Florence, for example. So the bread, the oil, the wine, is all from that location. And and given the fact that there are some amazing wine or bread or oil producers in Italy, there's no reason not to do that and to embrace that.
So what you're describing is a sort of macro business converted into micro little units, because that is an absolute change in the way that super brands used to identify themselves. So taking all brands, if you something like the Sheraton would very much promote themselves on the basis that wherever you were in the world, when you woke up in a Sheraton, you knew you were in a Sheraton. And that,
but you could almost reach over and where the nightstand would be, and what height it would. I mean, there's a truth in a way that's still the case in some brands. I mean, I think Hickson, for example, are well known for being quite rigorous with their brand requirements. But I guess the space between the lines is becoming ever wider. And what the design team from, in particular, Hilton might ask you is to say, look, you understand the brand requirements. Go and take those, put them to one side and go and have fun with it. And make sure everything fits within the particular, that the slip rating on the tiling of the bathroom is the right resistance, or the bed is the right height, and the nightstands are the right height, and those types of elements. But within that, within those what I would call minor limitations, go and have fun and enjoy it. Because if you enjoy it as a designer and you put your creativity into it, then that's what the guests will get out of it. They'll have that sense of wonder, that sense of a wow, that sense of immediacy and creativity. I mean, we all feel better for being in better places, right? I mean, or better spaces. So you can have a better meeting in a better meeting room. And that's what's important. That's what everyone is trying to express, and it's really find that visual narrative to engage in that way, and of which there are many. I'm not just talking about just the kind of interior design, but it's the sense of light, or engaging with the outside, or making the meeting rooms engage with other areas, rather than just creating a narrow box with a door on it that you can sit in with a rather tedious PowerPoint presentation.
And things like brands that you specify, and I'm thinking of not so much the public space, but in the rooms. So in every room there's an ensuite bathroom. So if you're looking at things like the basin taps and the shower, those are the things that cause the most problems in terms of leaks or whatever. Are there a list of products that you sort of live by when you're talking about being micro and macro? Do you say, well, we only use these two brands in these style of hotels, or do you mix and match it?
I mean, we try and stay local again. If we're working in Spain, for example, and we worked on the Hilton Barcelona, we try to use Spanish products. And again, so the sanitary ware, like Porcelano's or Roca, for example, both being two Spanish companies. So these are companies we immediately went to for things like tiling, or for the ceramic slabs, for example. Again, there's Neolith, and I mean a whole host of Spanish companies. And for us, it was important to go down that road, because I think firstly you have something which inherently is Spanish. And so therefore that delivers back onto the promise from the guests, but also in terms of like maintenance for the hotel, that becomes far more easier, because for example, Roca has their factory next to the Hilton Barcelona, so they literally have to walk across the road to go and service the tap. So that is also, it's not just a visual element. Obviously, as specifying sanitary ware or brassware for a bathroom area, you have to think about maintenance, like you said. They're difficult areas to look after, and they're expensive to maintain. And if they go wrong, it means you can't use the room. And if you can't use the room, that's a real pain for the owner immediately.
Yeah, it affects their income, and that's it. And especially
totally. Yeah, I mean the rooms are the generator for the hotel. And if a room goes down for a day, that's expensive, because it's not just the room that suffers. You're looking at then the meetings. You can't host the meetings because they're rooming down. So, I mean, very often, the hotel would have an attic stock of the brassware. So, if the tap were to fail, they can immediately just swap it over.
Yeah. And for things like flooring, which I'm always cautious of in hotels, for, as you say, downtime, I always look at somebody's made a mess on the carpet in some way and it needs to be cleaned. How do you take that into account in different countries now, with heat and energy saving and vinyl and plastic and carpet and wool and man-made material? Do those things get requested by your client, or do they leave that very much up to you now to put your style into their properties?
Well, obviously, I mean, the style being one element, but obviously just the function of the flooring in itself, and the application to the location. So in particular areas, certain elements become more acceptable than others. So obviously in a food and beverage area, we tend to steer away from too much carpeting, and make sure that the carpeting sits in such a way that it's actually delivering on the function, so that it's a resting space, for example, more like a lounge space. I mean, obviously, in some larger projects, some brands might accept carpet tiles. So if you were to have a real problem with staining or soiling of an area, that you could actually swap that out very quickly with carpet tiling. But many of the large brands steer away from that, and they just put up with the fact that they might have to call in a professional cleaning team to actually deal with something like that issue. but again, the choice of flooring has become almost exponential. I mean, there's so many companies and so many choices, and people are delivering new products all the time. So it's something which, you know, you always have to stay on top of. You know, and even things like woolen carpets or acrylic carpets now have anti-stain treatments to them, and so on and so forth. And you know, so you can deliver on the operational promise back to the client in saying, well, we can specify this flooring or this particular fabric, which is very light because it has particular stain treatment to it. And that's obviously that operational need is something which is critical for the hotel. There's no point delivering a tabletop for a hotel which is going to scratch on the first day. It's just you know, you know, when something is damaged or it doesn't look its best, I mean, as a guest, it's something we immediately recognize and think, oh, you know, it's a bit tatty, isn't it? So there are so many products now that you can put onto tabletops or highway areas, and which are very thin, like, you know, the ceramics, for example, from companies like I mentioned, Silestone or Neolith, for example, which we might never have put onto a credenza or a table because of their weight and heaviness or their cost. Now they've become so slender and so dynamic and so tensile in terms of strength, that's possible to do even within a guest room where you have, you know, obviously hundreds of rooms to furnish.
So as you mentioned, Stylestone also members of SBID, so I may
are they? Right.
Wonderful. You're calling out all our members, which is great.
Yeah.
But actually, I wanted to ask you about that for sustainability and for longevity. And, you know, how do you feel in terms of doing a fit out for a hotel? What's the length of time for a refit now? Not given the fact that with COVID, but many of those refurbs might be rethought for the next couple of years. But in general, what's the expected time frame for a fit out?
In terms of the longevity of the product?
Yes.
I mean, I think, I mean, it's always, I mean, I think that within the brand, each brand would talk to the owner of the hotel and actually agree a refurbishment schedule. Whether or not that's actually adhered to is really a question of the revenue. And I think the hotels look at it in two ways. Obviously, they you know, if the revenue begins to drop off, then they look at why. I mean, they have a point scoring system, and they also look at their social media, at the very, you know, websites that people can add comments to or make recommendations, etc. to, and they review all of those elements. And if they begin to see both of those elements dip out, that's when the hotel brand would come back in and say, look, you know, your hotel is not performing at the rate it could do, and that's probably down to, you know, the comments we see, which are the rooms are shabby, they need to be improved. So, you know, I mean, I've seen rooms which haven't been refurbished for 15, 16 years, which still look very, you know, I mean, the furniture is still in great quality. But I've seen rooms which are 3 or 4 years old, which, you know, be designed in a particular way, and the design in itself hasn't got that sense of longevity to it. So I don't think there's any hard and fast rule. I think most brands would probably want, you know, the rooms or the public areas to be refurbished every kind of 8 to 10 years. But I've seen that kind of go either way, and it might be that the hotel wants to rebrand itself because it's not working within that brand, and they would have to do just a kind of, they would have to do a property assessment, essentially, to say, okay, if we were to rebrand into this, what would we need to change? What would we need to modify in order to bring into those brand standards, in terms of a PIP, essentially. So again, you might find there's different motivations for determining the refurbishment program, really. Very often, it's not just the fact that, you know, the hotel has been a particular brand for 15 years and it's then moving on to something else. Nearly always it's because they are rebranding to something else, or they're finding that the revenue is demanding that.
Or a competitor opens up.
Or a competitor opens next door, exactly, and they just have to go for it. Or there might be in Milan, for example, when we worked on the Hilton Milan, there was the international fair 3 or 4 years ago. So again, many hotels were being refurbished, and you know, and the Hilton we worked on want to be part of that motivation, really, to kind of improving the property and then delivering on that promise to the new guests. So it happens for a variety of reasons, really.
And so Nick, just just to sort of finalise, tell me, the guests' expectations have definitely evolved, and as we was just touched on earlier, in as much as originally they would stay in a hotel purely for either a business trip or a short holiday, but now there's so many. How much of the voice, if you like, on social media and I think you've just touched on it slightly, do the investors and hoteliers and owners pay attention to? Because people are so vocal now on social media. Does that have an influence on the spend, do you think, and your budgets?
I'm not sure. I think at a higher level, obviously, when budgets are being formulated for the refurbishment of the hotel, really they're looking at, I mean, ultimately the return of investment, to put it in a kind of cold, hard economic perspective. But again, obviously, what they really want out of every penny that they spend is to deliver onto that guest promise, because that is the focus now. It's about the guest experience. And a while, when the hotels, as we were talking about, when the lobbies were kind of vacuous spaces really, which had no sense of engagement, you know, they didn't return on that investment. I mean, because apart from checking in, there was nothing else to do in the lobby, or if there was a lobby bar, it would be closed half of the day. Now that's not the case at all. So every area is monetized or engaged with, and even meeting areas, for example, where, you know, before you might have just had a kind of breakout space. Now that space is full almost throughout the day, because you might come out of a meeting and you might need to go and go a Zoom call with somebody else in Hong Kong, for example, so that you want a little space, a little kind of little hub area that you can actually sit in, a quiet space, and do that private meeting. So whilst you're in that, you know, one of the staff may come over and offer you a drink or offer you a tea, coffee, etc., as a kind of engagement. So it's really looking at every single area and looking at all of those touch points the guests have, and making sure that you're catering for all of those needs. And if you do that, I mean, I think they're not so cynical as to think, okay, how could we deliver every penny out of this space? But if you do that, if you deliver on that guest promise, that nearly always the guests will be there and will socialize, and they'll start ordering things. They'll start asking the hotel, can we have this? Can we have that? And that's where, you know, that kind of feedback delivers back to the hotel in terms of re-engaging on that part of their profitability.
Yeah. Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, and I could chat to you all day. I think we need to have you back to do a webinar so that you can see some of your fantastic projects separately from the ones that you've got advertised on your website. But we'll up and we'll do a webinar.
Let's do that. Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously we have some projects which obviously have now, obviously the process of design takes a few years, you know, when you've started a project, you know, nearly always 18 months later, the hotel is open, or 2 years later, the hotel's open. So some of the things that we show on our website now, obviously as designers, these were done 2 years ago, but we're funnily enough, I mean, it's a very exciting time. I think with COVID, there's been a real rethink about hospitality. I think many of the owners are now looking at the hotels they have and reinvigorating them, and I think that's feeding back to various design companies like ourselves. And we're fortunate that we've never had so many inquiries from different companies or private owners come through to us. So it's absolutely it's an industry which has always done well, and it's suffered over the last year and a half, but I think it's going to find its feet, and it's going to head off again. So there's always new things that we can show you, and show you some of our design work, some of the photographs of the hotels. Well, I like to do, especially, you know, because I imagine that many of the listeners might be, you know, starting their careers or new to their careers, is to show you how, not just what we've done, but how we do it, and the design process. Yeah.
No, it's been a pleasure chatting to you, and very insightful. So yes, let's do it again with pictures, as they say.
Yeah, with pictures. Yeah. So as a designer, we do rely on images and samples and things like that. It's not just a vocal process as such.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that would be my pleasure.
I think the podcast is good as a soundbite to start with, and people are walking to work or walking in for a walk to just listen to us, but yeah, I'm sure they'd like to sit down and see what you do as well. So, all right, well, we will do that. We will set that up, and we will promote that on the website soon, on the SBID website, and wish you good luck with the future. I'm sure that now that COVID seems to be coming, hopefully, fingers crossed, under control around the world, that so many industries have had to change and adapt, and we'll take some good with some of that bad and carry it through for the future. So we'll catch up with you again soon.
Fantastic. Great.
Thank you.
Speak to you soon. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Vanessa.